Hi, everybody. Thank you for adjusting to the new time this week. We do everything we can, Ro and I. Ro is here. Say hi to Ro.
Hi.
To get the gathering room at the same time every week. But sometimes when we are traveling, it doesn't work that way. Sometimes when we're traveling, we end up in a hotel room on the coast of California this time. And hi, Heather. Heather's here. Woohoo! I don't think you've ever been the first one on so far, Heather. Anyway, we're coming at you from a hotel room, and the light is fading here. We've got the sun setting over the Pacific, and it's beautiful, and it's shiny, but it will go dark, and I will be like a ghost, and that will be okay. Hello from Maryland. Hello. Oh, hi, Karen. Yay. Hi, Tiffany. Melanie. Kaboodaboo. Yay, Christina. Hi, Christina. How you doing? Ooh, I wonder if it's kind of like low light. Oh, it's so good to see you all. Trisha, you're here. Trisha's here in two ways. She's here, and she is here in the gathering room. She's here at our life coaching meet and greet for people who are being trained in our system of coaching, which is just a cover word for actually like seeking enlightenment. They won't see that coming. They don't. They just think we're off sniffing aromatherapy and
Melissa
gazing at our navels. Hello, Melissa. How you doing? Yes, Melissa is here and here too. There are a lot of people who are here and here. Are we up to, how many people do we have? Oh, 81. We still have 19 to go before we start today's theme. It's so good to have you all show up week after week. I really do not deserve it, but
you totally deserve it.
I'm so glad I get it anyway. This is how I feel about everything. Do not deserve all these wonderful things. Okay, we're up over 100. Let's start. Woohoo! Okay, so today I was trying to think of something to talk about, and I was getting very anxious. And I said to Ro, what should I talk about? She said, I don't know. I'm too anxious to think. And I said, why don't we talk about anxiety? And then I remembered the oft cited, now I can't remember whether it was the New York Times that put this out or whether it was the New Yorker magazine. I tried to look it up, but it was one of those two. I used to have a photographic memory. And what that means is that I never write anything down because I figure I will remember it effortlessly, and I don't. But you can check this one out. It's for real. They put this study up saying, without any irony or any like apologetic tone, that psychologists had found a link between high levels of empathy, and high levels of anxiety. This is not a big surprise to almost anyone. The surprise to me was that they also put a third characteristic, which is a quality of being somewhat telepathic or psychic, being able to pick up extrasensory information. And they just published this like it was no big deal, which it really shouldn't be, because I have to tell you, there is so much really, really solid social science research that is so well designed, so robust, so scientific on the so-called psi phenomena. It's spelled PSI. If you want to read any of Dean Radin's books, Radin, he is an immaculately careful scientist, and he looks at things like how statistically often do people know who is calling them on the phone? And it turns out that people know who's calling them on the phone with an accuracy rate that is like 1 billion to 1 against chance. And they look at a lot of different things like this, things that people talk about, sort of urban myths, but mainstream science tends to poo-poo. And they get run through the ringer because you're not supposed to talk about these things or say that they're real, but the research is actually so much tighter than most of the studies out there. All of this to say, they just published it. Yeah, if you have high anxiety, it can be linked with high empathy and high psychic ability. And I started to think about this as almost getting a certain model of body, like a certain type of nervous system. Once I went to a car expo. I was speaking at some car thing. Anyway, they had this incredibly powerful Porsche model something. I don't know. I don't care about cars, but it was like a race car level car. And the guy who was running the expo said, do you want me to take you for a ride in this car? Because for car people, this would be like a dream come true. I was like, okay, what do I care? So we get in this car and he's like, and he's like wrestling the steering wheel. And he's like, these things are murder to drive. And I was like, murder to drive? Like, it's the most expensive car you've got. Surely it should be the easiest car to drive. And he said, no, if you're going to have this much turbo, you're going to have this much power in the engine, the car is going to, its center of gravity is really hard to control. And you have to be incredibly like muscularly able to wrestle with the controls if you're going to have that much power. Every time you create ease, you reduce power was basically the equation. Not, I wouldn't swear to that in car terms, but that's basically the idea I got, that if you want to really soup up a car, the side effect is it's going to be harder to drive. So what I think now, and actually I've thought this for some time, is that a lot of us are born with kind of souped up nervous systems. I know this is true of all the women and my daughters and I all have this. Most of my best friends, my loved ones, we all seem to have very high empathic sensibilities, a tinge of the psychic, certainly really, really heightened ability to sense what people are thinking and feeling, but also a lot of anxiety and also exhaustion. That's another thing, high levels of burnout. And I used to think this was a really bad thing. And then I thought, well, if I'm trading it off for being empathic and psychic, maybe it's okay that I'm anxious and easily burnt out. Maybe I shouldn't keep aspiring to be like other people. Maybe I should just accept that I've got a different model of nervous system and that it's here for a reason, that I chose functionality in a certain way over robustness, just sheer physical stamina. I think in some ways, my son, Adam, traded normalcy for a kind of magic. You know, he has Down syndrome. And the other day he said something so interesting. He said, there's two of me. There's my real self, and then there's my burrier self. And we were like, what's your derriere self? And he said, no, he kept trying and trying to say what it was. And I said, well, can you spell it? And he said, DNA. So he was saying his real self and his DNA self are different. And it's almost like the DNA self is a car we drive, and we chose it for certain specific features. And if you're going to get a feature, like Adam is extremely psychic, I will say this. And in a way, I think he made a trade. He is more magic than people without Down syndrome. And I've talked to other moms who feel the same way about their kids. He traded in his normalcy for a bigger dose of magic. And I think a lot of us did that, even if we don't have Down syndrome. And if you have always pushed yourself to be more hardy, calmer, less sensitive, more even-keeled, and you haven't been able to do it, I have a few suggestions for you, and this is it. First of all, just consider that you may be driving a really souped-up nervous system that has incredibly valuable components to it, but comes with some difficult side effects. And that it's okay. You need to stop comparing yourself to someone who never has any anxiety, who never has insomnia, who is always full of energy, who is always cheerful, who never thinks weird thoughts or has strange feelings out of the blue. Maybe we're just a different make, you know? If you have high anxiety, maybe you just got, you traded in low anxiety for psychicness. And just consider that you may have wanted to drive this model of car, and it's okay that you kind of have to struggle with it because it's damn powerful in its own way. But don't compare yourself with other people. Okay, second is, once you've accepted that that's what you've got, don't try to make your nervous system stop being intense. So if you have intense waves of emotion, typically we're socialized to flatten them. Like to be socially appropriate, you know, you don't mention it if you're anxious or if you're sad or if you're feeling some nameless dread that comes from a psychic source, or if you're picking up on an energy from somebody and it's overwhelming you. Like there's not room for that in polite society, so you just tamp it down. Well, okay, you can do that in a room full of people, but when you're on your own, let the waves of emotion be as big as they are. There's information in there. Some of it is wisdom brought in these huge waves of sometimes very unpleasant emotion. But as you ride those waves, you start to pick up wisdom to stay balanced. And this means that when difficult things happen, you already know how to balance yourself. So people who are usually even keeled, when life gets crazy, they're like, whoa, this is impossible. And you'll be like, no, this is my life. This is how it always is. So try to look at waves of emotion as gifts and learning to sort of surf them, be buoyant on them. Let yourself go up when you're up and down when you're down. I was thinking the other day, worry as much as you want if you've got anxiety, but don't worry about your worries. Don't think you shouldn't be worrying. Get angry if you must, but don't be angry at yourself for feeling anger. Anything we try to resist persists, but when we try to push back against it, it actually multiplies. Especially if you've got high sensitivity, you try to resist that, it's going to explode. So just ride the waves and expect them to go up and down and say, yeah, this is part of the package of what I chose in this souped up model nervous system. Another thing is, in normal activities, take quality over quantity every time. I like to think about this brilliant sociologist named Max Weber, who wrote huge books. I may have mentioned him before. He's kind of one of my heroes because every couple of years he would just lie down for 3 years because he was tired, anxious, and depressed and couldn't function. Now, other people, social scientists around him at the time, were grinding out papers and theories and everything. And he would just rear up on his hind legs every 3 years and like spew out something. But because he put so much quality time into observing the world through this intense lens, when he did have the energy to do something, it was so singular. It was so felt. He actually popularized the idea of trying to connect with society and understand it through something called Verstehen, just German for understanding. But they still use that German word in sociology to mean actually projecting your own feelings into what it must be like to be somebody else. So in a way, I think Weber had that little psychic sense and the high empathy, but he also had the anxiety and the exhaustion, and he had to deal with that. So other people had huge amounts of quantity, but when he came in, he brought quality. And you see that a lot with like really high-strung artists and actors. And I'm not saying that you get to be a diva with no apology, but really people who are extremely qualitatively unusual often have high levels of exhaustion and burnout. There's something about bringing that singularity, that uniqueness into the world that seems to require the high sensitivity nervous system, which also becomes anxious and depressed and tired easily. So those are my steps. First of all, consider the fact that this is just the model nervous system you got and that it may be magical and able to do amazing things. Then allow yourself to just ride. Don't try to be like other people. Ride, bob on those waves of emotion. And then know that when you do get something, you get yourself together and you put something into the world, the very fact that you have struggled with things that are maybe deeper or higher or harder than most people means that you create a safe space for people who have smaller waves in their world. You become a source of wisdom just to survive. And that's cool. And putting one or two things out into the world that are like that. Do you know Leonardo da Vinci only painted 13 paintings in his whole life? There's so many painters who are putting out all kinds of art in the Italian Renaissance. He did 13 paintings that we have, and everybody goes to see them in all the museums. He was unusual. So if you're unusual, just value the few things you put out and acknowledge that maybe you are creating a value that is higher than you could possibly imagine. We're not going to compare ourselves to each other, but because there is no comparison. If you have one of these nervous systems and you allow yourself to follow these steps, you are going to start allowing an energy into the world that is uniquely your own, and it will affect other people in ways that can be very beneficent if you can be kind to yourself and let the machine you were born in do what it was meant to do. That is what I have to say about that. And now I'm interested in questions.
So many great questions already. I want
Yay.
to come down. Okay, Gwendolyn had a great question. She says, what is the relationship between anxiety and imagination? I find my imagination makes anxiety worse, but is also a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. Imagination and sensitivity are very, very closely linked. And they've actually done studies showing that people who have less emotional sensitivity do less imagining. And that means that they actually are creating fewer unique things, because everything that we create, we must imagine first. So imagination is the great tool of the creator. Everything exists first in imagination. So the discipline that we have to master is to take this powerful imagination that you probably were given and use your powers for good and not for evil, right? We can spend tons of time imagining dark and horrible things. And that lays the groundwork for dark and horrible things to happen. And we're actually prone to it because of our fear-based nervous system and because society tells us that we should pay attention to things that are frightening. I just watched a haunted house movie, and it was all about the horrible fear of death and the terrible feelings that must happen after you die and you're in the clay and you're cold and there's nothingness. And I thought, why not spend your time imagining that after you die, everything is amazing and wonderful, and there's no suffering, and there's warmth, and that you go into the light. I mean, people have imagined it both ways. I prefer to imagine the happy side, which means that for me, that is very real. I watched this haunted house show, and I'm like, you can't scare me. That is just so not where my imagination goes. But I had to train it. At first, any little hint of something scary in a movie would catch my imagination as a kid, and I would just spool it out into something of nightmare. I never slept. I was such a freaked out kid. But now I spend so much time disciplining my imagination to go to places that make my heart feel good, because I believe that that's true, that my imagination doesn't even take me to the dark places very easily. And as a result, I think my life has been more and more blessed. Maybe as a result, I imagine that it's as a result. So why not use your powers for good? Yes.
Excellent. Shannon is asking, riding the waves is okay for me, but what if my relationships can't handle it? My waves and others' waves do not only affect the person with anxiety. How do we help others, home, friends, work, surf with us?
Well, one thing to do is to, if it's other sensitive people around you, you can, just the way you can train your imagination not to go to the dark places, you can train your emotional reactivity. You're going to have a lot of emotions about the world in general. But if somebody else is freaking out and you freak out because they freak out, and then it becomes cyclical because you're freaking out because they're freaking out, their freak out gets worse. And then it just keeps spiraling and it gets really out of control. So one thing you can do is notice that the waves of emotion have a duration. If you allow them, they pass relatively quickly. Not as quickly as you'd like, probably, but even a panic attack rarely lasts more than a few minutes or a few hours. I have known people, I had one panic attack once that lasted 3 days. It was not fun, but 3 days is, relatively short duration. And as I've gotten older and learned to just ride them, you say, okay, this is anxiety. This is where my brain goes. It isn't necessarily a reflection of reality. And I'm going to let myself feel it. I'm not going to freak out and resist it. And also, I'm going to do my best not to inflict that on other people. So I will either talk to someone who I know is capable of handling it, or the way I've always done it in my life is I write in a notebook by hand. Is the best place to put my anxiety. And if I write for long enough, I write through the anxiety and something else flows in. If you've ever read Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, she recommends this practice called morning pages, where you just write freehand for 3 pages every morning and you don't reread it or anything. what you find is that if you start in a bad mood and you keep writing for the full 3 pages, you write through the mood. And something else, because you're creating something, a creative force starts to come through, and the psychic good part of your nervous system starts to convey something good into the world instead of the panic. As you learn that your own anxiety rises and falls, then when somebody else, your child, your spouse, your mother, somebody freaks out, you can take a deep breath and go, a wave. She'll ride it out. It's not my responsibility. I don't need to fix it. I can either give her space or him space, or I can just go in the other room, but it will pass. I know it because this is how it is with me. And the very calmness of your reaction, whether you stay in the room or not, will help the other person get through the wave faster. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I've just lost it. Donna, how do you honor your magical nervous system and still fit into society's demands? For example, when I'm consumed with anxiety and yet have to teach a class, or for example, how did you get through to know what to share with us today?
Yeah, that's great. Actually, having to be present for other people is the saving of me. I have got to tell you, thank God I was a life coach. I've been a life coach for 20 years because no matter how freaked out I was, and I can tell you there were times I was seriously freaking out, and I would have to go in and be present for another person or sometimes a group of people. And I would do this thing because here's the thing. If you've got the high anxiety and you've got the high exhaustion and everything, you also have the sensitivity, the empathy, and the psychicness. A little bit. I'm not saying that you're like going to be Long Island medium, but you do have a bit of psychicness. And what that means is that when you put yourself in service of another person, you kind of open this channel. You know, we are the hole in the flute that God is playing. And you do it like you do it for your child. You do it for somebody you're trying to help. And in the middle of your own anxiety, you can show up for another person. And what happens is that everything goes still for you because everything is focused on being a channel for calm for the other person. And so this is another thing writing does for me. If I'm writing to people, like if I'm writing something for you to read, I'm in service to you. And that sort of takes priority because I have high levels of empathy. You know, it takes precedence over my anxiety. And then I can use everything I've experienced, including my own negative attributes, as ways to understand you and serve you. And I get to feel the calm that comes in as the force that is holding us all and caring for us all starts to flow. And it's like you're driving that high-powered car on the freeway at a very high speed, and you get in the groove and you're just shooting forward. And then you get to experience the joy of having this kind of a machine.
Brilliant. All right, so let's get real for a minute. Jonah asks, what would be your number one suggestion to deal with chronic debilitating anxiety?
I know it sounds so stupid. If you're alone, absolutely the answer is breath and articulating, watching. So the first thing is to calm the breathing, because when you don't breathe, your brain stem reads this as near death, and panic attacks are very associated with shallow breathing. And once your brain stem decides that you're starving for oxygen, you're going to go into a full-on I'm going to die panic spiral. So if you can slow and calm your breathing, it goes right to the brain stem. That is number one. Force yourself to take long, slow, deep breaths, and then start articulating what you're feeling, either by writing it down or by speaking it to yourself out loud or in your head, to the point. And what I do is I speak of myself in the third person. So, she's very anxious. She's very anxious. Oh, now there's some depression there. Now I did this a few weeks ago, and like after 15 minutes of saying, anxiety, she's very anxious, suddenly came, she's so tired. And all I really needed was a nap. So by moving into the part of the brain that is the witness, you rob energy from the part that's freaking out. And by calming your breath, you get the base of the brain on the side of relaxation. And if you do those two things, breathing and witnessing, you'll be okay. Better yet, find another calm, compassionate witness and tell them. Have a list of phone numbers that you can call if you're freaking out and say, I'm freaking out, talk me through it. Have an anxiety buddy who's also psychic. You won't even have to call each other. You just know. Yeah.
Okay, great. So Sandy asks, I have a daughter that struggles with exhaustion and anxiety, and I think this is why. How can I broach this with her without sounding so woo-woo?
You know what? I tried this so hard with one of my daughters, and I'm so sorry. I'm like telling their stories in public, and I tried to give them some respect. But I think this is really worth saying, and I don't think she'd mind, either one of my daughters would mind if I told you this. Both of them, I tried all kinds of mothering techniques, and I tried, when they had anxiety or other issues, taking them to therapists, getting medication, whatever. I tried all the normal things. And then finally, I just took a deep breath and said, you may just have a magical nervous system, and you may have it for a reason. And the reason is not what you've been told, and it has nothing to do with what you're learning at school. It may have everything to do with healing others, yourself, and the earth. It may have everything to do with what people regard as magic. It's super woo-woo, but just go with me here for a while. And there was truth in that. And until they heard the truth from me, they couldn't be calm. I don't know how they're feeling about it now, but I can tell you over and over that I tried every single thing before I went to, maybe you're just feeling somebody else's real energy because you're a bit psychic. Because I can feel it in you from the other room, because I am a little bit psychic. So why don't we all acknowledge that we're a little bit psychic and start talking about the reason we may have been born a little bit psychic? And that would calm them down. Not because I was telling them a happy story, but because I think they felt it was true. And ultimately, nothing calms people like the truth. Yay.
So Lara asks, what about intense longing, which is not exactly the same as anxiety?
Oh, that's different.
Longing for home, for meaning, for understanding, for spirit.
Longing is how the magic creates. Longing, I don't think it's something that we make. And I don't think it's a product of the nervous system. I think it's something we are given in its time. And I love being old as the hills these days, because I can look back on my life and all the things I longed for, and sometimes irrationally. If I wanted something, if I longed for it because the culture told me I should have it, like I really want to get, I don't know, this grant from the National Science Foundation. I didn't get it. There were a lot of things that I thought I wanted that I didn't get. And it turned out that if I'd gotten them, it would have been actually probably worse for me. But when I longed for something, unreasonable, irrational longing, invariably it was because I was meant to, number one, go get that thing, or number two, create that thing, or number three, manifest that thing, to use the New Age language. Like, there's something about accepting the longing and riding the longing and saying, I won't deny this. And furthermore, I'm going to believe what rests my heart, which is this, I'm longing for this because it's meant to be mine. I actually came up with a theory which holds true for me now, and that is that longing is loving something real before you believe in it. So when you love something and you know you do, but it's forward in time and you don't yet see it or believe in it, there's an almost unbearable quality to the yearning. And the only pill I could take that ever made that settle down was to play with the thought, I am meant to have this thing. And sometimes it took years, but when it came, there was absolutely no mistaking that this was exactly the thing I had been longing for, and that the longing itself is a kind of potent magic that allows things to come into our physical reality. So embrace the longing, feel the longing, take care of yourself in the longing the way you would a sick patient with a fever or something. But also, don't tell yourself the lie. Don't use your imagination for evil to say, I have to be braced for never having this thing. Instead, give yourself the gift of using your psychic imagination to say what your heart wants. This longing is meant to be fulfilled. Not necessarily exactly the way I think it will, but this feeling is a gift And it's a premonition of what wants to come into my life. And I can say to you, after years and years of doing this, it works. It's real. The magic is real. And that's what we get to know because we have weird nervous systems. And while we're lying in our beds freaking out, who knows what we're doing out there in the imaginary ether? But then it comes to pass. So just remember that, you guys. Don't compare yourself to other people. Ride the waves. See them as gifts. Know that they're bringing you wisdom and happiness. And then know that the quality of what you put into the world, because it is magical and because it does come through something extraordinarily sensitive, is worth much more than the quantity of stuff you could spew out if you had less to deal with. So that's my anxiety talk for the day. And I love you all for joining. And if those of you who are sitting there thinking, but I don't have this, don't worry. We all love you. And when you have anxiety, we'll be waiting to take care of you. So with that, let's all go off and lie down and ride the waves of our emotional sensitivity. And we will share it in a psychic way in the every when. Mwah, mwah, mwah. I'll see you guys next week.